Harper Audio presents There's a Spiritual Solution to Every Problem, written and read by Wayne W. Dyer. I completed the initial stage of this program on the 15th of June, 2000, at our home on Maui. It was a wonderful sense of accomplishment. I enjoyed the summer with my family, swimming, hiking, and playing tennis. We had dinners and movies with close friends and precious free time to read and share intimate moments, especially with my wife, Marceline, who was so instrumental in helping me find a spiritual solution to the problem I was about to experience. Little did I realize that in a few short months, I would be called upon to test those principles for a spiritual solution to every problem firsthand in my own life. In the autumn of 2000, I was literally brought to my knees while alone in a hotel room. I could barely breathe. My chest felt like it was in a vice. I was sweating profusely and soon was informed that I had had a heart attack. But something was dreadfully wrong with this picture. I don't smoke or drink. I'm not overweight. I exercise every day, and I've done so for over 25 years. I watch what I eat, I meditate, I do what I love, and I love what I do. I have a great marriage. I have wonderful children. I don't do heart attacks. That's for other people who live their lives in such a way as to invite in heart attacks. Not me, not Dr. Wayne Dyer. Yet there I was, in the hospital, with monitor wires attached all over my upper body, and with an IV in my arm. In 3 days, I would have an angiogram procedure. For the first 24 hours, I lay there in a state of shock and disbelief. It is called denial. I felt sorry for myself. I refused to acknowledge that such a thing could happen to me. I was, to be honest, scared to death. After that first day, I began to rehash what I had written that you are about to hear. I reminded myself of the title, There's a Spiritual Solution to Every Problem. And this surely was a problem. I remembered that I could bring the energy of spirit right here to this hospital room. By doing so, I could actually turn this thing around. The facts were the facts. My heart had been injured. Now it was up to me. I am not this body. I am a spiritual being, eternal, always connected to God. I could shift my awareness to being the observer rather than the victim. It was as if the light came on in a room of darkness. I felt the presence of a higher, faster healing energy almost immediately. I began to be cheerful rather than morose. I circulated around the cardiac ward, attempting to cheer up those who were much worse off than myself. I looked for what was right about that place and experienced gratitude for everything my senses witnessed. On Monday morning, the angiogram revealed a blockage in one artery that may have been a part of my physical anatomy since birth. My heart was strong and the damage was minimal. A stent was inserted in the blocked artery after a balloon poked out the offending plaque. I am now back to my normal exercise and work routine. I decided to share this information with you to illustrate how a seemingly insurmountable problem has a spiritual solution readily accessible. It worked. Trust me. I, Wayne Dyer, know from first-hand experience. Can you make a flower grow? Probably your first response is, such a simple thing to do. Plant a seed, provide sunlight and water, and in time, a flower will emerge. However, I am inviting you to consider who or what generates the life that makes a flower grow. Who or what causes the flower seed to blossom and the tiny embryo to become a human being? Who or what grows our fingernails and beats our heart even as we sleep? What is this force that keeps the planets in place and hurls our world through the galaxy at a breathtaking speed? These questions have been asked for as long as humans have had the ability to contemplate their existence. Spirit is what I have chosen to call the invisible energy, which is the source and sustenance of life on this planet. This force, no matter the name we give it, can solve every problem that we encounter. I will begin by explaining the 3 basic steps to finding your own spiritual solutions to problems. I first read about these steps when I immersed myself in the aphorisms of Patanjali, written sometime between the 4th century BC and the 4th century AD. I will share with you how this knowledge can be applied in your life. You will discover for yourself that these things you have come to label as problems have a solution available to you right now in that world we are calling spirit. Recognizing the availability of an invisible force that can be put to use in solving a problem requires overcoming a great deal of our early training. Do you believe there's only one kind of power or knowledge, which relies on your sensory or intellectual faculties to solve problems? Most of us have been taught this is true. This is a conditioned attitude of non-recognition of our divine connection. In this state of non-recognition, we believe that medicines, herbs, surgery, and doctors are responsible for all healing, or that improving one's financial picture involves the exclusive application of working hard, studying, and sending out resumes. Patanjali described a kind of knowledge or power that is not accessed solely through the material world. Recognition that this power exists and is always available is the first step of activating it. As physical beings, we can make a flower grow, but if we are thoughtful, we realize that we cannot even begin to unravel the mystery of the invisible force that initiates life. Yet it is in this omnipotent spiritual world that we find the solutions to all of our problems. When we incorporate the first step, recognition, we begin the process of accessing this power. In the second step, we go into the phase of realization, where nothing but our own personal experience is trusted. We become an explorer in virgin territory where no one but ourselves can be. Here, only you can validate your experience. I suggest that you begin this process of realization by visualizing the presence you seek. Create an inner picture of yourself receiving divine guidance and banish all doubts about its validity. You will find that your picture dissolves into the reality of a presence that is accessible within yourself. This is realization. It is a personal experience beyond anything related to an intellectual exercise. With practice and desire, in quiet meditation, you will experience this presence. The third step, reverence, is acquired quickly by some people, while for others it can take a long time. Communing quietly with the spiritual force and becoming one with it means there's no sense of separation. In other words, we begin to see ourselves as a part of God. We are in a state of reverence for all that we are. There is a spiritual solution to every problem. I believe the definitions I use for spiritual, problem, and solution can form the basis for a unique way of bringing peace and fulfillment into your daily life. It is my contention that once you internalize these concepts, you will rarely revert to the belief that you face insurmountable problems. I think it is important to see spiritual as a part of physical rather than separate these two dimensions of our reality. It is all one. Spirit represents that which we cannot validate with our senses. The real key to understanding spiritual is this idea of our inner world and our outer world. One world, yet two unique aspects of being human. I have a friend who compares the physical to a light bulb and the spiritual to electricity. When I refer to spiritual, I do not intend it to be synonymous with religious. Religion is orthodoxy, rules, and historical scriptures maintained by people over long periods of time. Generally, people are born into religions and raised to obey the customs and practices of that religion without question. These are customs and expectations from outside of the person and do not fit my definition of spiritual. Spirituality is from within. My personal understanding of spiritual practice is that it is a way of making my life work at a higher level and of receiving guidance. The ways in which I do this involve a few simple but basic practices. I have enumerated them here in my own order of significance. Surrender. This is first because it is the most crucial and often the most difficult. In order to surrender, you must be able to admit to being helpless. In surrender, my thoughts are something like this. I simply do not know how to resolve this situation, and I'm turning it over to the same force that I turn my physical body over to every night when I go to sleep. I am willing to turn any problem over to this invisible force, which is my source, while keeping in mind that I am connected at all times to that source. In other words, the spiritual life is a way of walking with God instead of walking alone. Love. Activating spiritual solutions means converting inner thoughts and feelings from disharmony to love. I use a metaphor of a long cord that is hanging from my hip, and I have the option of plugging that cord into one of two sockets. When I plug into the material world socket, I receive the illusions of disharmony. I feel out of sorts, hurt, upset, anguished, and hopeless in terms of being able to solve or correct my problem. When I am plugged in this way, I struggle to attain false powers. Defining empowerment only in material world terms is a reflection of being spiritually disconnected. When I imagine this cord being yanked from the material world socket and replugged into the spiritual socket, I immediately experience a sense of peace and relief. I can relax and remember that the Spirit is God, which is synonymous with love. Love, and love alone, dissolves all negativity, much as light dissolves darkness by just its mere presence. The infinite. Awareness of our infinite nature is terrific for putting everything into perspective. When I unplug myself from the material and replug myself into the spiritual, I immediately let go of fear, judgment, and negativity. Infinite love is what I receive from that new energy source. An empty mind. I feel strongly about the need for meditation to nourish the soul and access divine assistance. Beyond the actual act of meditation is a willingness to empty my mind of my agenda and be open to what will inevitably come to me. I relinquish my thoughts to the power that Spirit has to make things work. Completely emptying the mind of our agenda leads to forgiveness. Getting to a state of emptiness means ridding ourselves of all blame and all angry thoughts about what has transpired in the past. There is no room for hanging on to who did what and when and how wrong they were. Generosity and gratefulness. Sometimes I feel the necessity to remind myself that we come into this world with nothing, and we will exit the same way. So finding a spiritual solution involves doing the only thing I can do with my life. That is, giving it away and being simultaneously grateful for the opportunity to do so. Here's a formula which works for me. I get back from the world precisely what I put out to the world, which is another way of stating the proverb, as you sow, so shall you reap. I recommend your spiritual practice involve being generous and grateful with your thoughts. The more you send out thoughts of how may I serve, rather than what's in it for me, the more you will hear back, how may I serve you? Connectedness. The Sufi poet Rumi once explained that the terms I, you, me, he, she, and they are distinctions that cannot be made in the garden of the mystics. In spiritual consciousness, you view yourself as a flower in this garden, and everyone else in the garden connected to you in an invisible way. Our difficulties are something we realize that we share with everyone else. Nurture your sense of connection to everyone and God as well. This allows you to remove your ego from conflicts. This awareness of being a part of everyone allows you to suspend anger toward others and to see them as partners in the resolution of all problems. Know that there are people to whom you are connected who are available to help you find the right job, to solve a puzzling issue that seems irreconcilable, to help you back on your feet, to resolve financial difficulties. Everyone becomes a compatriot rather than a competitor. This is spiritual awareness as I practice it. I try to remind myself in moments of despair of the beautiful affirmation from A Course in Miracles. I can choose peace rather than this. Trust me, it works. And finally, cheerfulness. In terms of outward appearances, there is something noticeable about people who have reached a high level of spiritual awareness. They seem to be in a constant state of bliss. Ask yourself this key question. How do I feel most of the time? If your answer is that you feel anxious, anguished, hurt, depressed, frustrated, and so on, then you have a spiritual disconnect. This could mean you have allowed your personal energy field to become contaminated by the debilitating forces of those in your immediate life space. I often ask myself, how am I truly feeling inside myself these days? If my answer is not so hot or upset, I meditate and go to the quiet place where I can plug my cord into the spiritual outlet. The state of cheerfulness returns almost instantaneously. Every teacher who has been significant in my life has demonstrated this wondrous quality of being able to laugh and to take life lightly. I love Erich Fromm's insight. Man is the only animal that can be bored, who can be discontented, that can feel evicted from paradise. Only you can evict yourself from the Garden of Paradise. That concludes the components of the word spiritual. Now let's take a look at what I mean by the word problem. In my heart, I feel that there is really only one problem for any of us. That is, when we allow ourselves to separate from God. But in a very real sense, we can never be separate from God. Yet, we often still believe that we have problems. The problems of disease, discord, fear, anxiety, scarcity, disappointments in others, and so on, are all in our minds. When we truly reconnect to our source, these feelings disappear. I use the word problem as if it truly exists, yet I know every time I use it that it's an illusion. So every time you hear the word, know that I perceive it as an illusion created by ourselves because we have separated ourselves from God. There is a powerful line in A Course in Miracles which reminds me of this lesson. It takes great learning to understand that all things, events, encounters, and circumstances are helpful. We can learn to view every crisis as an opportunity, which wouldn't necessarily make life easier, but would make it more satisfying. We would never be able to view anything as a negative occurrence because we'd see everything as useful. Our conditioning is so strong that we often have far greater faith in our problems than we do in our ability to no longer have them. We often display a much greater faith in the power of cancer or AIDS than we do in the power to heal them. The evil, the pain, the anguish are of our own creation, and they represent opportunities to gain greater learning. I ask you to keep an open mind as we travel this path of healing to bring peace back into your life on a permanent basis. And now let me speak to you about what I mean by the word solution. I once sat in on a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. The words of a sign on the wall kept gnawing at me throughout that meeting. It read, "Your best thinking got you here." I thought how true that is and how it applies to all of the circumstances of our lives. Our best thinking is exactly where all of our so-called problems exist. If we couldn't think about them, they would not exist. What we need is a change in thinking to realize that a connection to the divine is what eradicates our problems. You cannot send problems out of your life by attacking them or understanding them in more depth. Instead, you correct the error in your thinking that produces the problem in the first place. Once you bring a correction to the problem, it no longer has any validity, and it disappears. We correct these errors with the creation of a new spiritual delivery system. This is the basic introduction to the idea of having a spiritual solution available for every single problem. In the Yoga aphorisms, Patanjali teaches that we are capable of reaching a state of awareness in which we can perform miracles. He counsels us to be unafraid of transcending the limitations imposed upon us by the material world. Patanjali's words caused me to truly think of myself as capable of living at a much higher level than I had ever even considered before. I felt urged to go beyond traditional ideas, which acted as obstacles to my union with God. Patanjali offered hundreds of specific suggestions and practices to reach the oneness or union with God, which he called yoga. Here are 5 aphorisms that can help you to gain access to your spiritual answers. I have arranged these 5 major themes in a way that I found useful for myself, and I trust will be helpful to you. The first aphorism: the central act of ignorance is false identification. Patanjali describes ignorance as a basic misunderstanding of one's real nature. When we identify ourselves as our name or our title, our body, our possessions, achievements, or reputation, we are denying our true identity. What we are exploring here is ignorance defined as falsely identifying oneself as only of the material, ego-based world. Replace that false identification with imagining yourself eternally connected to a divine source. With this new identification comes an inner resolve to reorient yourself when faced with a problem. For example, if you want to stop a compulsive habit of overeating, begin by no longer identifying yourself as a body full of cravings. Instead, imagine yourself as pure, eternal peace and joy, always unified with God. Ignorance keeps you from genuinely experiencing pleasure or fulfillment via the senses because you clutch at what appears to provide it rather than seeking true happiness. To become an illumined soul, we must not conceptualize ourselves as our senses and all that they lust after. That is ignorance. We are not the objects of experience, but the experiencer itself. Seeing ourselves in this way provides us with a new tool for problem solving. Try it the next time you feel the impulse to overeat or consume a toxic substance, or even to spend time in painful grief over a loss. A dramatic example of this presented itself in the following letter and poem I received from Mary Lou Van Atta of Newark, Ohio. She is speaking directly to this idea of false identification as she writes of her ordeal and how she ultimately found a spiritual solution by remembering who she is rather than who she had falsely believed she was. Her letter goes like this. Dear Dr. Dyer, my son was murdered in a robbery attempt 2 years ago. Frankly, I thought I would never recover from my grief and loss. Amid all the clouds in my life and mind, I was somehow led once more to your books and tapes. I had read and listened to many in previous years, and while I had enjoyed them, I was too busy to truly listen. Upon going over them again, I realized one underlying truth in all of it. We are spirit in body, not a body with a spirit. I am once more a happy, healthy woman with a full steam ahead system. I will always feel my loss of Ross, but I know it is not the end of the story. I can wait. It's okay. Again, thank you. Sincerely, Mary Lou Van Atta. With Mary Lou's permission, I include the poem she wrote. It summarizes this first ancient, radical idea. The central act of ignorance is not being ill-informed, but in falsely identifying yourself as your form. She calls her poem I Am. The I that is me, you cannot see. You see only the form that you think is me. This form that you see will not always be, but the I that is me lives eternally. The spiritual journey does not consist in arriving at a new destination where a person gains what he did not have or becomes what he was not. It consists in the dissipation of his ignorance concerning himself and life, and the gradual growing of that understanding which begins with spiritual awakening. The finding of God is a coming to one's own self. Patanjali's second aphorism. The mind of the truly illumined is calm because the peace of God within all things is known, even within the appearance of misery and disease. This second aphorism brings to mind the adage that the three truly difficult things to do in life are returning love for hate, including the excluded, and saying, I was wrong. If it requires stillness to know God, then we need to be in a place of loving calmness in order to be able to have God's assistance in problem solving. But how do I get to that place of calmness? I believe you can move into that state of knowing God by intentionally choosing calmness in moments of anxiety or fear. Yes, you can choose to be calm at any moment by reminding yourself that you are no longer choosing to live by your conditioned past. Our conditioning has led us to the error of thinking of ourselves in terms of finite beings. James Carsey, in his book Finite and Infinite Games, describes a world of finite games in which winners and losers, rules, boundaries, and time are all extremely important. In the world of finite games, titles, acquisitions, and prestige are of paramount significance. Being identified with losers in the finite game is frightening and dangerous. The ultimate loss, of course, is death. There is also the infinite game, which you could begin to play if you so choose. In this game, there are no boundaries. The forces that allow the flowers to grow cannot be tamed or controlled. The purpose of the infinite game is to get more people to play, to laugh, to love, to dance, and to sing. The infinite player speaks from the heart and knows that answers are beyond words. This is not to imply that players of the infinite game cannot also play finite games. The choice is to play mostly infinite games, but while playing the finite games, refusing to take them seriously. Others may think you are serious, but you know better. You know. You see your world in the terms of an infinite game. You will smile more frequently. You will feel serene. You will access spiritual solutions. The third aphorism of Patanjali. Sin is non-existent. There are only obstacles to one's ultimate union with God. Most of us grew up believing that a sin was an act of disobedience or ingratitude toward a God who is both separate and punitive. Behavior which religion has taught us is sinful is conduct which is away from God. This, according to Patanjali, is not a reason to immerse ourselves in guilt and use up life energy attempting to somehow make amends. Rather, it should be viewed in the context of an obstacle that we have yet to overcome. The concept of being a sinner is an image of self-contempt and guilt, while the concept of encountering an obstacle is empowering. We have been trained to think in terms of sin and punishment. The empowering way is to view trials as lessons and opportunities to choose differently. The sinner, filled with guilt, becomes immobilized and remains in passive inertia. When we view the sinful behavior as an obstacle to a higher level of awareness, we can still take responsibility by asking ourselves, what is the lesson for me, and what can I do to avoid this the next time? If you have violated any of the commandments which you hold on to as law, if you have stolen, cheated, or lied, or coveted, or even physically harmed another, try viewing these actions as obstacles to your spiritual union with all that you truly are and can become. Even if you have done irreparable wrong to someone through uncontrolled greed or anger, you can still view this action in terms of obstacles to your union with God. Certainly you will feel remorse and do all that you can to right the wrongful acts. Sincere penance does not consist of perpetuating grief for wrongs, but in resolving to avoid in the future those deeds which call for remorse. Patanjali's fourth aphorism. The person who is steadfast in abstaining from falsehood has the power to obtain for himself and others the fruits of good deeds without having to perform the deeds themselves. Normally, when we use the word truthful, we imply that a person's words correspond to the facts of which he speaks. Yet in this Yoga Sutra, steadfast in abstaining from falsehood means something quite apart from being factual. What is meant here is the practice of completely and wholly identifying oneself as a spiritual being, united with God at all times, and never confusing one's identity with the ego world of possessions, achievements, and reputation. In this state, we find ourselves gaining those fruits of good deeds. They will enable us to not only resolve our own problems, but those of others as well. Listen carefully to the words used in this sutra. Obtaining for yourself and others the fruits of good deeds without having to perform the deeds. Just what does this mean? Patanjali suggests that steadfast abstention from falsehood means that saying to someone, God bless you, means that the person is truly blessed because we are no longer capable of even dreaming an untruth. Similarly, this steadfast abstainer from falsehood can perform miraculous cures by simply telling a sick person that he is well. Thus, Patanjali suggests that when a person becomes perfected in truth, he literally gains control of truth. That person's being, along with their words and actions, allows them to obtain the fruits of good deeds without necessarily performing the deeds with their physical bodies. Now, I'm not offering you sainthood here in exchange for becoming a 100% truth teller. Rather, what I am proposing is that you open yourself to an idea which allows you to gradually remember your identity as a connected to God entity. The more steadfast you are in this regard, the more you will hear others say, I just feel better when she is around. I feel calm when he shows up. You literally raise the consciousness of those around you. We begin to see the fruits of good deeds appearing without having to work at it. Ultimately, we are close to the top and find that there are others just wanting to bathe a bit in our aura, so to speak. Let in this idea that you can access divine spiritual power to alleviate problems first for yourself and then for others. And finally, Patanjali's fifth aphorism, my favorite. When a person is steadfast in his abstention from harming others, then all living creatures will cease to feel enmity in his presence. Patanjali's statement, abstention from harming others, includes not only actual acts of harm, but also thoughts of jealousy, judgment, and injury. Steadfastly renouncing violence in thoughts and in all dealings with others creates an atmosphere wherein violence and enmity ceases to exist because it is not reciprocated. Any situation where you experience anger or even mild discomfort involves thoughts of enmity toward the other person or people. Other people will not feel enmity or anguish if you steadfastly abstain from having harmful thoughts toward them in the first place. Amazing! By you working at not having any judgments or harmful thoughts, those around you will be free of anguish also. I find it quite effective to use the following 4 words, first internally, and then I say them out loud. They are, "You're right about that." Not sarcastically, without rancor, I simply allow the other person to be right, which is all their ego really wants. This tool does not make the other person right, it merely allows someone to believe that they are, and it allows you to be steadfast in your abstention from harmful thoughts. As you practice allowing others to be right, you are beginning to live from your higher self rather than your ego. Eventually, it will be your authentic way of reacting to others even when they are being insulting. As you contemplate this idea of abstention from harmful thoughts or intentions, keep in mind that the reason you are not experiencing bliss at this precise moment is because you are focusing on what is wrong or missing. Problems are illusions of the material world. Solutions are attributes of your immersion in the world of spirit. As you face a problem, remind yourself that you created it with one mind, and you will solve it with another. Spiritual problem solving ultimately means examining the entire concept of energy in a new way. Generally, we think of people with high energy in terms of enthusiasm and tirelessness. I am suggesting you think of energy in a context of vibration and movement. In this formulation, energy is the speed of an individual's energy field. The idea here is that a higher frequency will aid in problem solving, whereas a lower frequency will intensify problems. By increasing the speed at which you vibrate, you move into those frequencies I am calling spirit, and away from those which are grounded in the material world of problems. Stephen Hawking, who may be the most scientifically enlightened mind on the planet today, has said, "Apparently common sense notions work well when dealing with material things like apples and or comparatively slow-moving things like planets. But they don't work at all for things moving at the speed of light. Hence, if you want to access and utilize the energy which vibrates at faster frequencies, you have to be able to shift your energy at appropriate times out of good old-fashioned common sense." Valerie Hunt, in her intriguing book, Infinite Mind, Science of the Human Vibrations of Consciousness, concludes, "I can no longer consider the body as organic systems or tissues. The healthy body is a flowing, interactive, electrodynamic energy field. Motion is more natural to life than non-motion. Things that keep flowing are inherently good. What interferes with flow will have detrimental effects." Think of it this way. Everything is in a state of motion. We appear to be sitting still, but we know that our planet is spinning once every 24 hours, orbiting the sun once every 365 days, and moving through space at dizzying speeds. The same can be said of your body. It is a field of vibration and movement which appears solid and motionless. All information that you receive comes to you through your senses. Your eyes, for example, perceive light, which is really a very fast vibration of air and electromagnetic particles. Your ears perceive sound, which is a slower frequency of air vibrations. Were you to examine that information perceived by your eyes and ears before your senses pick them up, so to speak, you would see that those vibrations have no evil or disharmony inherent in them. They are simply problem-free vibrations. But when you take them in, suddenly you say, "What I hear is a problem for me. What I see is evil and terrible," and so on. In other words, you took in those problem-free faster energies and processed them in such a way as to create problems. Now for the big leap. Every problem that you face has a vibrational frequency and a movement to it. When problems collide with our slowed-down solid world, we feel the conflict as an imbalance in our energy field. Thus, diseases of all kind represent a frequency and a movement just like everything else in the universe. Addictions, too, have a frequency or movement. Fear, stress, and anxiety, these are all frequencies. I believe we all have the potential to learn to increase the speed of our vibrations. In the slowest vibrations, we have illness and disharmony. In faster but still slow vibrations, we have ordinary human awareness. Thought and spirit are found in the fastest vibrations. For the purpose of explanation only, I have assigned an arbitrary figure representing the frequency speed. A equals 10,000 cycles per second, B equals 20,000 cycles per second, and C is 100,000 cycles per second. Consider first your physical health, where most of your time is spent attempting to reach point B, where you will feel okay because you have an absence of symptoms. Between point A and point B is where you take medicine, consult medical practitioners, and generally strive to get to a point where you just feel okay. Point C represents super health. You can do 500 sit-ups, run a marathon, and be toxin-free. Hypothetically, disease materializes at a very low energy frequency. Ordinary human awareness is what we call a normal frequency, and super health represents a balanced, fast vibration which has the ability to counteract disease frequencies. This can also be applied to your emotional state. At A, we find fear, anxiety, anger, and mental disease. At point B, your emotional well-being is stable and you feel all right, but any dramatic shift in circumstances or the behaviors of others could send you back into that frenzied world of worry and fear and guilt and depression and so on. Point C symbolizes perfect emotional health. Here you know that no one can interfere with your bliss. The actions and opinions of others have no unpleasant effect on your emotional state. Realistically, the movement from A to C is a shift in energy frequencies which you can cultivate and choose. When you speed your energy up, what you consider to be accidents and misfortunes are simply gone. In these faster vibrational frequencies, you are able to invoke intuition, insight, and other potentials which are dormant when you're in ordinary human awareness. There is one more element on this A, B, C continuum which I'm speaking about that plays a significant role in ending problems by accessing spiritual guidance. I'll call the third element in this example consciousness. At point A, the lowest level is ego consciousness. At this frequency, you resonate with an inner view that you are separate from everyone else and in competition with the rest of the world. You are absorbed in self-importance and validate yourself on the basis of what you have, what you do, and what others think of you. Ego consciousness is a very slow frequency in which you feel distinctly separate from spirit. As you progress to average human consciousness, you reach point B on this continuum. Point B I call group consciousness. Here you identify yourself on the basis of what groups you have chosen to align yourself with or been assigned to as a result of your birthplace, your ethnic identity, or your cultural label. In group consciousness, you have the frequency of awareness that categorizes life with phrases like, I am male, you are female. I am old, you are young. I am Italian, you are Chinese. I am Christian, you are Muslim. I am white, you are black. I am conservative, you are liberal. There are millions of these. On and on the groupings go, pigeonholing everyone into a frequency where conflict resolution is accomplished by determining who is right, stronger, better, or whatever. Wars are the outcome of group consciousness. Ancient enmities continue to flourish because of geographic boundary disputes, religious traditions, cultural practices, and so on. Every time you find yourself labeling others or yourself, you're setting up a potential problem. It becomes you against whoever is in the other group. Illness becomes a battleground when you must fight that which is invading the territory that you call my body. Lack of prosperity is due to others having more of what you want. Point B, group consciousness, is a step up from A, ego consciousness. However, point B still keeps you squarely in the middle of a life that is not peaceful or able to nullify problems. At this frequency, having problems is considered a normal function of living. As you approach point C on the consciousness scale, you reach a place that I call unity or God consciousness, where separation is unknown. You see no divisions, and you know that you are connected to everyone and all living creatures. In this state of unity consciousness, you no longer view your life circumstances as problems.